You're listening to Affected by Altitude, a Colorado Rockies podcast for and by Rockies fans on Rocky Mountain Rooftop. Thank you for joining us as we discuss all things baseball and Colorado Rockies. Hello and welcome to Affected by Altitude, a Colorado Rockies podcast on Rocky Mountain Rooftop, a proud affiliate of the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Evan Lang, and with me, as always, is Skyler Timmons.
Howdy, and I'm just noticing there's a pair of pants sticking out of a drawer that I will have to slide back and put in.
See, nobody would have noticed it unless you pointed it out.
I'll notice it, Evan.
This is the exact same thing when we interviewed Gabriel Hughes, and he's like, "Oh, I have schmutz on my shirt." It's like, nobody's going to notice. He's like, "But I know."
Exactly. And so then I have to call it out.
And in case you have missed those, we did get some really awesome interviews with Gabriel Hughes and Zach Agnos, two top pitching prospects for the Rockies. Those are up now where you find episodes of this show on our YouTube channel. If you haven't seen them, highly recommend checking them out. Just two really delightful fellas that we got a chance to speak with.
Mm-hmm. Gabriel Hughes is a nerd in a good way. But yeah, that kid's a big nerd, which is fun. A very knowledgeable individual.
Wise beyond his years, and Zach Agnos very quick-witted and clever.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of fun to talk to these guys. One of the things that I always praise the Rockies about, I'm not always 100% on board with the things that they do, but their tendency to draft young men with very good heads on their shoulders is something I am immensely supportive of.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not here to talk about that. Well, we kind of are, but in the grand scheme of things, today we're here to talk about spring training so far. And Skyler, I kind of want to kick things off by talking about Chase Dollander and seeing what your thoughts are on the Rockies' number one prospect and top pitching prospect. The stuff on paper, his pitches look good, but the results so far this spring has been mixed. He's had 3 starts now. 1 was really good and 2 were a little bit rough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just seen it. It's the growing pains that you can expect from a young starter. He's only had 1 professional season under his belt. And I know we get caught up in like the prospect of, he's going to crack the opening day roster. And you and I, as much as anybody, want to see him at the big league level. But it's when it's most beneficial for him. And it's spring training. Like we say, you got to take everything with a grain of salt. We don't know what exactly maybe he's working on in a start. Maybe he was something here or there. But it's mixed. And we were talking a little bit before. The stuff looks good. Fastball, the off-speed stuff, secondary pitches, stuff is looking good. He's got the makeup and the demeanor of a big league starter on the mound. We've seen when he's given up a home run, he shakes it off and comes after the next guy. So he's got all the pieces there. It's just putting it together. And on his start here on this Saturday, after the Friday game got canceled because of weather, he was going to start that versus Jacob deGrom and the Texas Rangers. Ends up starting and gets roughed up a little bit. Main thing, 4 walks, 7. Not good. But and I guess he was missing outside to a lot of guys against right-handers. So, just still working through some things. He's a young kid, 1 professional season under his belt. Just growing pains.
Yeah, and really the first time so far this spring that he's not located his pitches well. Like, that's generally not been a problem. And his first inning of work today against the Athletics, really not that bad. He just ran into a ton of trouble in the second and just never really recovered. Ended up getting taken out in favor of Bradley Blaylock. But so far this spring, 3 starts, it's a 12.15 ERA. It's spring training, so you can't really look into ERA that heavily. 8 strikeouts over 6 2/3 innings. And he really hadn't been dealing with the walks too much up until this point. But then today he issued 4 walks, which was new because prior to that, he had 1 walk?
Yeah, it was 1 walk
across his last 2 starts. So it's tough. And it's not even that he's getting too badly beat up on hitting wise. Today, it really was the walks that came back to haunt him. But he's given up 10 runs, 9 earned on 7 hits, and 3 of those hits have been home runs. Did not give up a home run today, which is awesome. And honestly, he probably could have left the game without having the 5 earned runs today, but he went out with the bases loaded, and if you give up a run, you're going to get dinged for those earned runs. That's just how it works. It's tough because the pitches, they look good overall outside of his command issues today, but you've just got to figure out what is going to be the best for him moving forward, because we were at the very beginning very rah, let's get Chase Dollander on that opening day roster, but now I don't know.
It's one that, like, I think the thing is, like, the Rockies don't necessarily have to put him on there. No, he's not on the 40-man, so there's no pressure. Like, oh, it's either he's on the roster or he's down the minors. That's kind of the discussion. The Rockies like him, and they want to give him every opportunity. That's great. And if they still feel confident and he makes the opening day roster, that's great. But don't do it just because of the hype he has as, oh, he could be the best pitcher in Rockies history and this pedigree, and he could be a legit ace. Don't let the hype be the deciding factor as to why he makes the opening day roster. If he's not ready and you don't feel he's ready and he needs to go work on some things, and maybe that may be more beneficial to work on down in Albuquerque type of place, or if you don't want him to be in Albuquerque and you want him to keep working on some other things, and just even double A if you wanted to, but he'd probably go to Albuquerque to acclimate. But don't let the hype, don't get caught up in the hype and drinking the Kool-Aid of, oh, we got to have him on the roster just because of who he is. Like, no, do it if you feel he's ready, if he's proven that he's ready. And like you're saying, we can take spring training stats with a grain of salt. Don't worry too much about the ERA and things like that. Just looking at him and, the Rockies evaluating him and stuff, if he looks ready and you're confident he can get big league hitters out effectively and competitively, then by all means. But let that be the decision, not because he's Chase Dollander, your number one prospect.
Yeah, there's a difference between a fast development and a rushed development.
Exactly.
You want to avoid the latter. If you legitimately don't think Chase is ready to rock and roll for opening day this year, then you've got a lot of flexibility. Like you said, he's not on the 40. You don't have to option him or anything like that. He is right now still in camp invite status. And the Rockies have a lot of roster flexibility right now. They do not have a full 40-man roster. They've still got 13 of their camp invites remaining in camp, and they've only optioned a couple guys so far to the minor leagues, and we don't even know what they're going to end up doing with some guys in terms of injury status or other stuff like that. So you can take a minute and continue to evaluate. And this wasn't Chase's last start of the spring. There's still weeks left to go.
Yeah, and he's going to appear in the spring breakout, which we could probably talk about the breakout roster later. But yeah, there's still plenty of spring left. And even if he doesn't start the day on the opening day roster, it's not the end of the world. He can start down there in Albuquerque, make a couple of starts if he looks good and looks nice there after a couple of starts, maybe a trial run of pitching at altitude, gets a start or two in Albuquerque. And then if he looks good, they're going, all right, well, we can call him up now. He's ready to go. We just wanted to make sure type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, think of all of the pitchers that we've seen develop in the Rockies where they start the season at one level of the minor league system, a few starts or a few appearances in, and they get immediately moved up because it's just like, hey, we were just making sure you're good to go. You're good to go. We'll bump you on up now. Like, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And especially with Dollander is you don't want to ruin his confidence. And that's the problem, is him not starting the season on the main roster and being in AAA Albuquerque, for say, and getting shelled down in the PCL. That could hurt his confidence. But so could putting him on the opening day roster when he's not ready and him getting shelled by big league hitting.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, like, as fans and like people covering the team, like, we don't know the team's full process, and they're with him every day. So either decision, I feel like the Rockies can have that confidence, and that's one of this is I'll trust them with their decision. If he doesn't start the season, I'm okay with that. And if he does, awesome. But if he doesn't, hey, there's guys that could get a look. We'll still need to figure out what's going on with Austin Gomber. but Bradley Blaylock has looked really good in spring training.
Yeah.
He
It's
could,
one of those situations where damned if you do, damned if you don't,
yeah,
where people are going to be mad regardless of what happens, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, and so that's what I think. That's kind of where we're both in that agreement. Is like, it is what it is. Whatever happens, happens. Great if he's there. Okay if he's not. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to lose sleep over it because, like we said, coming into the season, the rotation was mostly set. We figured it's going to be Freeland, Senzatella, Marquez, Gomber, Feltner. For the most part, that's still going to be the case. Gomber's status is just up in the air right now because of that sore shoulder injury. Other than that, 4/5 of that rotation is settled, and you have guys on the 40-man in camp looking good, like Blaylock, Tanner Gordon, if you wanted, Carson Palmquist. Maybe even he could somehow pitch his way into a spot still. There's options around,
Yeah.
but
And this is sort of a good opportunity to evaluate where we are in camp. Um, about half of the non-roster invites have been reassigned. Most of the guys that are still left are guys that you would say do have a chance of either being on the big league roster or starting their season in AAA Albuquerque, or guys that a lot of the guys that reassigned, even if they may start in AAA, were never really going to make that opening day roster to begin with. So far, in terms of people who've been reassigned, Jack O'Loughlin, Heffrey Yan, Tommy Doyle, and Sean Sullivan on the pitching side of things. Catchers, Bryant Betancourt and Roniker Palma. Infielders, Julio Carreras and Ryan Ritter. And then outfielders, Sterling Thompson, Benny Montgomery, and Cole Carrig. So they've all been reassigned. Pretty much everybody else on this list, I'm pretty confident in their ability to at least have a chance to make the roster, or they're going to get that extended look. The one guy I'm not so sure about right now is Carson Palmquist, who has not yet pitched so far this spring. He has not been reassigned yet, and I'm not really sure what's going on with him for why he hasn't pitched yet. It's nothing that I have been given any information about that I'm privy to.
I think Thomas Harding, he wrote about it a little bit, and part of it was, I believe it was his grandmother had passed away, and so he didn't start camp and everything. But so he's a little late in because they're giving him the time with the bereavement and grieving process. But from what it sounded like, he should be pretty soon getting into some game action, at least into the big league camp game action. And otherwise, I think he's been just working in the backfields with a lot of those other guys. But I believe, and I'm pretty sure that's what I had seen Thomas Harding writing about with Carson Palmquist. So it's nothing like too big or like an injury worry or anything. It's just part of that process. But I think he should be getting here pretty soon, I believe.
Yeah, he's a guy who I'm really excited to see how he does. Even if he doesn't start on the opening day roster or anything, I've been really impressed with his progression since the Rockies drafted him and everything that he's dealt with. So I'm excited to see him when he gets into the spring. Skyler, of any of the guys that have been reassigned, though, is there anyone that really surprises you?
Of the ones that have been sent down or reassigned already?
Yeah.
Not really. You look at a lot of these guys and they're pretty standard moves of everybody that's been sent down. None of them are really big surprises. All made sense to me of who's been sent down as they just trim the fat. I know people loved Jeffrey Yan, but he still has never appeared in the big leagues. There's still a lot of development to have to some refining there. Yeah, we love the celebrations and whatnot, but don't let that cloud you from the fact that he's kind of a wild pitcher. Yeah, we love the leaps and bounds off the mound, but you still got to throw strikes.
Yeah, and we saw a little bit of everything from the Jeffrey Yan experience during camp. And if he finds any sort of success in AAA, he is going to be an immediate fan favorite down in Albuquerque. They're going to love this guy. But he was not a guy who I expected to make the opening day roster. And I'm perfectly okay with this move. A guy who I think did pretty well, but I'm not surprised that he's sent down because he's on a minor league deal already, is Jack O'Loughlin. I was quite pleased with what I saw out of him. so far, but he's still fairly young. He's got very limited big league service time, so I have zero problem with having him start the season on a minor league roster.
Yeah, they were depth moves because again, the 40-man roster is already pretty much filled. There's just the one spot open right now, and they just brought in a lot of these relievers as depth pieces. And Rockies are going to need to plug and play with that bullpen throughout the year. At least they're bracing themselves to. So O'Loughlin's one of those perfect guys you send down to AAA and just kind of hang out there on the minor league roster and until you need him, just kind of like we saw with like a Josh Rogers or Jeff Hartleb and all those kinds of guys.
Yeah. And the other pitchers, Tommy Doyle, who also on a minor league deal, spent pretty much the entire season last year in AAA with the Braves organization. He's somewhat of a known quantity. I didn't expect him to make the roster. And then, the last pitcher that's been reassigned, Sean Sullivan, there was basically no chance of him making the opening day roster anyway. He's probably going to start the season in Double-A Hartford, where he ended last season, but still recovering from his hip surgery and going through all the motions of that recovery. So on the pitching side, not really anything to be surprised about. And on the position player side, not really anything to be surprised about as well. For the non-roster invites, I think it's more important to look at the guys who haven't been reassigned yet. And for me, that's guys like Zach Agnes, Gabriel Hughes, and Kyle Karros, guys who, while they are probably not going to be on the opening day roster, it's very clear how high on these prospects, how much extra they want to see out of them this spring, that they are still up in big league camp.
Yeah, it's good to just get them exposed and gives you hopefully an idea of, well, if these guys perform well, then we'll get them on that roster at some point this season. What if we get to a point where, well, we got to trade Ryan McMahon. The perfect deal comes along. Well, who's going to replace him? Well, Kyle Karros has been looking really good there in Double-A Hartford, and we've moved him up to Triple-A, or even we'll just have him jump up over Triple-A up to the big league level. Who knows? But it's good to see him just getting that good long look, and Bud Black can familiarize himself and the coaching staff, really help these guys who are building into key pieces.
Yeah. And for Gabriel Hughes, it's just, here's a guy who hasn't pitched much in the last 2 years after his Tommy John surgery, and he's still shaking off the rust, but he's been pretty fun to watch so far this spring. And I think that's going to tell you how keen the Rockies are on how he's developed, but they're also helping him to shake off the rust and be ready to go. And I think that's important as well. Really, of those three, the only guy who I could see potentially making the opening day roster, and it's still a long shot, is Kyle Karros, just as that additional bullpen help. But honestly, we still have no idea at this point. What did I say?
You can say Kyle Karros.
Hey, put Kyle Karros in the bullpen, see what happens.
There we go.
Aaron Schunk has a couple appearances on the mound from college, and he wasn't too terrible.
There you go. But yeah, no, Zach Agnos, I think that's what we're seeing after Justin Lawrence gets shipped off. He ends up with Pittsburgh. So good for him. We can follow up because that hadn't happened our last episode. Justin Lawrence is in Pittsburgh now, but they're just leaving that spot open for a Zach Agnos maybe. We assume maybe Diego Castillo, and he's still in that running. But he had a rough outing like immediately after all that happened. But yeah, Zach Agnos is right in that conversation still. So they're giving a good look to some of these guys, and hey, that extra bullpen spot could instead go to a Bradley Blaylock or Carson Palmquist, something else. But it's nice to see them when the Rockies feel confident about some guys and are just giving them looks, more and more looks, and those opportunities in big league camp.
Yeah, especially when there's no rush to reassign and option all of your guys. And it's like, and right now they've only optioned 4 players, and these are guys who we were all expecting this to come at some point. So just to round things off, so far as of today, they've optioned Anthony Molina. That was pretty much known that he was going to spend a lot of this year in AAA to work on becoming a starter. Juan Mejia, prospect who's just not ready yet. Evan Justice, and Greg Jones, all guys who none of us expected these guys to be on that opening day 26-man roster. So nothing really surprising.
Yeah, I know. Like Evan Justice, there's you can look around on social media and see people that are really high on him, but he's one that's still in that fringe. There's a lot to like about him, but there's a lot that needs work, and that main thing that needs work is his command, and that's what he needs to continue to work on down in AAA. So a lot of these guys, like you're saying, we didn't expect to make the opening day roster. It's nice to see if they could make a run for it, but it wasn't an assumption that they would.
So that's pretty much where we're at for camp so far. Plenty of time left to go. There's plenty more games left to play. Hopefully not that many more that aren't going to be either on TV or on radio. If you're playing a game, there's no reason why it shouldn't be broadcast in some capacity.
Just put up a camera. Like we don't need audio. We don't need broadcasters or
yeah. Just let me watch.
Give me a camera with a score bug. That's all I need.
Put somebody's iPhone on a tripod out there, and stream the game. That's all I want.
Get a mom out there with the tripod camera, stream it to Facebook Live, and there you go.
No, if it's somebody's mom, you need it to be like the real shaky hand cam with like the "You're doing great, sweetie." Have somebody like really obviously shuffle in front of her, carrying drinks.
And the most random conversations happening off camera.
I didn't even know whales could get that big.
Yeah. I had to go to the doctor to look at this big old growth on my back. Those are the conversations you'd hear if that happened.
Oh, my hernia's acting up again.
Yeah. What do you take for your hemorrhoids?
That's when you work in the sponsorships.
Yeah, there you go.
But that's camp so far in a nutshell. We're going to take a quick break here and start talking about probably going to mosey into talking about the rotation as we continue our projections and expectations. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Affected by Altitude with Evan and Skyler. Thanks so much for sticking with us through that break. And Skyler, let's touch on this really quick before we get rolling into the rotation. You mentioned earlier, but the Rockies put Justin Lawrence on irrevocable waivers while we were basically recording last week. And he was claimed by the Pittsburgh Pirates. So the Justin Lawrence days here in Colorado are done. Wishing him the best in Pittsburgh. But this is another one of those moves where this was the right move for the Rockies. It's a difficult decision. It's a prospect and a pitcher that you've been working with. He was with the organization for like 10 years. He was very grateful to the organization that thanks for taking a chance on a JUCO kid. And he made his big league debut with us, and it's going to be hard not to miss the guy. But I think this is going to end up being the right move for both parties.
Yeah, and I know it's always the Rockies' like worst fear to see a pitcher or a player go be successful elsewhere. But like you're saying, it's perfect for both teams. No, he needed a different location, different place to go, and Pittsburgh has a good pitching staff. There's some good pitchers over there, and he helps bolster that bullpen a bit. And a relatively cheap pitcher. There's a lot to like there still, and so getting away from Coors Field and just being able to pitch more in a neutral location more often than not will be perfect. Brent Strom, former Arizona Diamondbacks pitching coach. He's an assistant coach down there with Pittsburgh, so it should be a good move for him. And Pirates get a established guy that they can slot into the bullpen, and hopefully he performs well for him and keeps that spot and doesn't end up on waivers or anything again. But yeah, for the Rockies, it opens up just a lot more avenues of Zach Agnos, or they can go bring in some other young guy who's got options and they can have a little more flexibility with.
It clears a space on the 40-man roster, and it gives Justin Lawrence the opportunity to find himself in a different location. Yeah, and like you said, Pittsburgh is a great spot for him. They have a great pitching staff and a great pitching coach system.
Yeah, and that was, let's do the game the other day. Thomas Harding was on the 850 KOA talking about that, and like, yeah, it was part of the Rockies' motive to just do that early in camp so Justin could have the opportunity to land with a club and still have most of spring training to work with that club instead of the week before opening day or like a couple days before opening day. But this way he gets a chance to go settle in over there and still audition and latch onto a club. So the Rockies were just doing right by a player.
Yeah, and that's something I like. The Rockies get a lot of grief for a lot of different things, and they've made some pretty boneheaded decisions, and they've burned some bridges with players, but a lot of the time they will at least try to do right by their players. What's going to be really weird is that he's got a new number over there. He's wearing number 62 instead of 61 that we're used to. I don't know. It's just like the one number change always throws me off.
Like when Justin Morneau went from Minnesota, and then when he went to Pittsburgh, he wore 66 because it was just 33 wasn't available and 66 was just the double of it.
I mean, that's the reason why John Gray wore 55 with the Rockies. So his college number was always 22, but 22 wasn't available when he came up. So he flipped it upside down and you get 55. Then he, of course, went back to 22 with the Rangers. But yeah, waiving Justin Lawrence and having him picked up clears up a 40-man roster spot. And there's probably going to be a couple other spots on the roster cleared up at some point. Lucas Gilbreth is probably going to start the season on the injured list. He had, it sounds like, thoracic outlet surgery over the off season, which is something that I hadn't realized, but it's what his injury designation is listed as right now on the Rockies media. He's throwing some camp games, but he's not gotten into any official action yet. And so I've got to think if he's not throwing already, there's a pretty high chance that he starts the season at least on the 15-day so he can keep recuperating. Because remember, he had Tommy John surgery, and then he came back for 3 or so appearances last year, and just after every appearance was having the shoulder issues. And it's been taking a lot for him to get back. And he's also got options as well. So there's a chance that he could start in AAA as well and work his way back up.
Yeah, no, he's still working through some things. So there's not a whole lot to remember at the moment. They're just filling up spots with the young guys.
Yeah, and that's honestly a good thing. And not calling Gillig old at this point, but the more that they do to clear up playing time for this increasingly young bullpen, the better. I think now we have a much more, there was a chance to say like your Luis Peraltas or your Seth Halverson that they could maybe start the year in the minors. And I think, especially they've been performing pretty well so far this spring, I think you see both of those guys. And, it's of course a bummer that Jeff Criswell had to get Tommy John surgery and he's out, but then that also still clears up a spot. It's trying to find those silver linings there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a door closes, a window opens type of thing. And when I'm like Gilbreth, they still expect him to be ready for opening day, and that he hasn't felt any fatigue. So still he has an option. He still has an option year left, or at least 1 or 2. And so if they wanted, they can, and he's feeling good, they could still send him down to AAA to start the year and work on some things.
But could you imagine starting the season with 3 left-handed pitchers in the bullpen?
No, that's too many.
It just makes you think back into the days where it's like, well, here's the Rockies bullpen. They have no left-handers whatsoever.
We had Chris Russin 2 years ago, and that was always like the mentality it felt like.
I liked Chris Russin a lot. I was oft-forgotten important part of that 2017 playoff run.
Yep, he was good for that 1 year.
Hey, sometimes that's all you need out of a guy. But moving right along here, as we continue our player projections and expectations for the year, we needed to talk about the rotation at some point. And pretty much the rest of this episode is going to be us talking about the rotation. So we might as well just dive right into it. And the guy I want to start with is left-handed pitcher Austin Gomber, because Gomber took himself out of his last expected start with shoulder soreness. And in his previous start, he had not been getting the velocity on his fastball that he is used to. And so he let the trainers know, and he's been shut down. He's thrown a couple of bullpen sessions. He threw a little bit on Friday, but has not gotten back into a game yet. And it just makes you wonder, Bud Black says, "Oh, he's recovering nicely, but we don't have a timeline for his return, and it makes you wonder if Gomber is one of those guys who could start the season on the injured list."
Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting with Gomber because oh, he's been pretty average since coming over in the Arenado trade. No injuries. 2024 was really his first season with Colorado where he finished the whole year pretty much healthy. Didn't have any of those setbacks, but it was kind of a tale of two seasons where he had some good stretches. He had some bad stretches. The end of the day was just very average. And so they kept him around for that like $6 million arbitration contract. This is his final year before he hits free agency. So it's just that weird spot of, and he could be a bullpen piece too. They factor him into the rotation, but he could also be a bullpen piece. He's flirted in there a couple of times. So he's just that weird spot where he's not an established guy. Seems like a guy that they're very high on, but they didn't want to lose him and just keep him around because he's a reliable arm for everything. So it's a weird situation with Gomber. And then him being injured just throws another wrench in the plans where it adds more questions of, well, maybe then that's how Dollander gets on the roster or it's somebody else type of thing. Because they had already told him, like him and Freeland, that the best pitchers would be in the rotation. Well,
Yeah.
he's pitching, so they probably wouldn't slot him into the rotation come opening day once he starts getting more action here in camp.
And it's tough because, like you said, Gomber's been a little all over the place with the Rockies. His 2021 season, when he first came over, he was surprisingly good, but a little unpolished because it was really his first like full season in the big leagues. That was the season where he got shut down and with the pars defect in his back. But he had like a pretty good year, especially at Coors Field. And then the next 2 years, lots of ups and downs, being moved in and out of the bullpen and the rotation. And I would say 2024 was really his second best full season with the Rockies. He made 30 starts, 165 innings. Overall was pretty solid, but nothing to write home about, a 4.75 ERA. And it just makes you wonder. It's like, I love Austin Gomber. Seems like a great guy, but is he the future of this organization? And the answer is pretty much no. And they hung on to him. But remember that before they finished arbitration, we were all talking about, well, do they trade him? Do they non-tender him? And it's kind of a bummer to think about, but you've got to look at the future of the organization, and for Gomber having to make that decision of, is he the guy you want to hang your hat on, especially when he's set to be a free agent at the end of the year?
The answer is no. And he's a solid back-end rotation guy. That's what he was in St. Louis. That's what he's been in Colorado. If he goes somewhere else, that's probably what he'll be there too. So, and you look at his projections for the year, nothing outstanding. They have him making like 25 to 29 starts. So pretty much mostly healthy year. But the best estimation of his projections, 159 innings. He's not a guy who's going to eat a lot of innings, a lot of time. How many starts would he go like 4 innings? And he'd get through those 4 innings and then, okay, and then we have to go to the bullpen. So you're not going to get a lot of length out of him. The 165 innings last season, that was the highest he'd ever pitched in a season. Next closest was the 139 in 2023. So each year in Colorado, he's pitched more and more innings. It's hard to imagine he can get back to that 165 this season and stave off injury again this year.
Yeah, and you look at some of the other pitchers, and Austin Gomber did have, in terms of his overall pitching, the big thing was that he was one of the team's leaders in quality starts. That's great. He had 12 quality starts. Next best was Kyle Freeland at 10. But actually, no, I'm wrong completely. Ryan
Quantrill was at the top,
and then it was Ryan Feltner. I completely forgot about Cal Quantrill now that he's gone.
He's a Marlin now.
That tells you how much the rotation was just in constant flux last year. But 12 quality starts is fine. And that's been Gomber in a nutshell. Is he's fine. He will go out and he will start a game and he could do pretty swell for you. But at the end of the day, there's not much more there than a solid back end of rotation starter. And with everybody healthy, and especially looking at, and we'll talk about them in a minute, Herman Marquez and Antonio Senzatela both looking healthy and pitching well this spring, and the young guys knocking on the door, it just doesn't leave a lot of room for a guy like Gomber.
Yeah. And so with Gomber, you just hope, I think he pitches well if and when he does appear, and we'll figure out what that happened with that shoulder. But if he's healthy and starts pitching well, you trade him as soon as you can. If Dollander doesn't start the year on the opening day roster and Gomber's in that rotation or something, he pitches well, you look for a trade as soon as you can, I think, when it comes to Gomber. I know a lot of teams don't like to trade early in the year, but hey, break the norm. Don't wait until July. You move him as soon as you can if the opportunity arises somewhere. Heck, it would, if he wasn't injured and was actually like pitching here in spring training, he could have been a spring training move. Type of thing for some of these pitchers, like, oh, no, Baltimore's lost Grayson Rodriguez. He's going to start the year on the injured list.
Yankees just lost Luis Gil.
Yeah, there would have been so many options, but he's injured too, so nobody would really want to take him right now.
Yeah, and we have no idea if the Rockies are going to make any more moves. Joel over at Purple Row just wrote an article about it, of the Rockies over the last couple of years have usually made a trade of some kind here in March before the start of the season. And we have no idea if the Rockies are going to do anything yet. So it's still a lot of wait and see. Yeah, we got to wait and see if Gomber's going to be healthy. We got to wait and see if the Rockies are going to make moves.
Yeah, but when it comes to Gomber, you just hope he can just be solid, average, get you through a game and give you 5 good innings.
More of the same.
Yeah. More of the same old Wombo Gombo combo.
Yeah. And that's, it's not to denigrate Austin Gomber by saying like he's an average pitcher. He's fine. Like there is a mighty need in baseball for those kinds of guys, especially with the Rockies, of guys who are going to at least eat some innings and go out there and get the occasional quality start. It's just that as the team gets younger and as you start looking at the future of this organization with you guys like, you have multiple lefties who are on the verge in Sean Sullivan and Carson Palmquist that, would look to slot in over Gomber at some point, even if you kept him, because, Austin Gomber is 30 now.
Yeah, he's 31. Or he'll be 31 this season.
And that's just how baseball goes.
Yeah. Some would say that's baseball. But see, and it's hard with a lot of these pitchers. Like, he's a pretty average pitcher in Colorado. If he was somewhere else, would he be a different kind of pitcher? Yeah, probably. That's just the way it goes. He could be better. He could be worse. That's baseball.
Whatever happens, that's baseball.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take one more quick break, and when we come back, more starting pitchers, so don't go anywhere.
I thought we were just going to talk about the unit as a whole, not in each individual guy.
Welcome back to Affected by Altitude with Evan and Skyler. We're talking more about the rotation. Just wanted to start with Austin Gomber because his status is a lot more up in the air. You had Skyler calling me out over the ad break. I think you could do both of. You could talk about the unit as a whole, and you could talk about the individual pitchers as a whole. Mm-hmm. And honestly, right now, for where we are at, if you want to talk about the unit as a whole, the big thing is going to be everybody staying healthy, because that's something that the Rockies have not done over the last few years, where Herman Marquez hasn't really pitched for the better part of 2 seasons. You can say the same for Antonio Senzatela. But overall, when you look at the starting units, the starting unit as a whole, the projection isn't great overall. You have Feltner with 1.7, Fangraphs WAR, Gomber at 0.9, Marquez at 1.7, Freeland at 1.0, and Senzatela at 0.8. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but that seems like a pretty low number for wins above replacement for your rotation to have in a projection.
Well, yeah. Ones I'm seeing, Armand Marquez is predicted at 2.1 at 4.
Yeah, and that's just for the zips is what I was going through.
Gotcha. Yeah, you just look at it and it's a standard Rockies rotation, which, considering who the Rockies are and where they pitch, not terrible. But in the grand scheme of things, only 2 guys with a sub-5 ERA, and they're pretty high sub-5 ERAs with Marquez and Feltner. Doesn't paint a pretty picture. The strikeouts pretty average. Walks still pretty up there. It's just more of the same problems that we've talked about the Rockies for near 30 years now, where pitching is going to be their biggest weakness. And in 2024, it was, Evan, a huge weakness for them.
By ERA, the worst bullpen in the league. By ERA, the worst rotation in the league. And,
by walk percentage, one of the worst. By strikeout percentage, one of the worst.
And we've used so many different guys as a starting pitcher over the last 2 years. And so that's that's why it's so important this year is staying healthy. It's like Antonio Senzatela has looked pretty solid this spring. He looks a lot like the pitcher we've seen before, but that's fine so long as he is healthy and making his starts.
And also don't ever let him pitch against the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Because you know what they do to that first pitch fastball he throws every time?
I don't want to talk about it. I love Senzi very, very much. Like, I have always been a Senzatela fella, but I don't like it when he pitches against the Dodgers.
But I think that, like, highlights to some we've talked about before is that 3 of these guys in the rotation projected. What more is there to talk about with them? We know who they are. We know what they've done, both good and bad. And we just kind of hope it's probably the better than the other or somewhere in between. We're like, it's hard to get excited about a projection of that rotation of Kyle Freeland, Marquez, and Senzatela because we've seen this 2 sides to all 3 of them. And it's hard to know of which one are we going to get today.
Yeah.
Really love Marquez. He's had a rough go of it since that 2021 campaign when he was an all-star in that first half. Even then, all 3 of them have been ups and downs and are not the top of the line pitchers that any of them could have been.
Yeah. And for Armand, we need to see him be closer to that 2021 all-star form than he has in his last few years, where he's messed with his mechanics a little bit. He's struggled a lot in multiple different levels. He only made the 1 start in 2024. He only made 4 starts in 2023. And his 2022 was really not much to write home about, where he had a 4.95 ERA and 31 starts. It's tough because I legitimately love all of these guys, but Armand, I think, for more than all 3 of them, if you're looking at Freeland, Senzi, and Armand is playing the most for his future now. Absolutely. Where he just turned 30 years old. This is a guy that's been pitching for the Rockies since he was 22, made his debut with the Rockies after we traded him. And, the Rockies have gotten a lot of grief on social media that I've seen, where it's like, oh, they're 3 of the starters that they're using they've had since 2017. And I think it's important to point out that 2 of those starters were 22 years old in 2017 in Senzi and Marquez, and then Kyle Freeland was 24.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also a lot to be said that they've at least been consistent through that time period, minus the injuries. But they're now playing for their futures, and Armand especially. So Armand is a free agent at the end of this season. And the Rockies are going to have to make a choice of, do we trade him, do we let him walk, or do we extend him?
Yeah. Well, and also it's part of Marquez, too, because he had talked about last season if he wants to play for a contender. He wants to go win. And if that's not going to happen in Colorado, I think Marquez of these three guys we're talking about, Marquez, like you're saying, is the one that has the brightest future, bright spot. Like you said, he's only 30 years old, just barely turned 30 years old not too long ago, and has been highly regarded by teams still. And like they know the quality of his arm, and him coming back and healthy, because the start of that 2023 season, he looked good through his first couple of starts before the injury happened, and then he had to go get Tommy John. But he was looking good in those first 2-3 starts. So I think the league knows about him. There's going to be some calls for him if he can stay healthy and perform. And honestly, yeah, if you're the Rockies, you move him when you can, just like with Gomber. Any of these guys that have been with your team since 2017 should be available if somebody comes a calling.
And that would, I admit it, it would hurt me to see Herman be traded and see him go pitch for another team. I make no secrets about it, how much I love Herman. He's probably one of, if not my favorite pitchers in the history of this organization. I love him very much, but you've still got to make a decision. And sometimes in Major League Baseball, those decisions are very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Can't afford to be sentimental, Dick Monfort. You cannot afford to be sentimental, because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a business, and the business is trying to win.
Yeah.
And the Rockies clinging to these guys for dear life since the back-to-back playoff years has clogged the system and has diluted them into a form of how they're supposed to build a rotation and developing and all this stuff. It's just handcuffed them.
Yeah.
None of the deals for any of these guys has panned out. The extensions, the Freeland and Senzatella are under contract for at least 1 or 2 more years apiece through 2027. Some around that ballpark. You've been handcuffed with these three guys trying to capture the magic from 10 years ago.
The last non-option year on Senzatella's contract is 2026. And then Kyle Freeland has a vesting option for 2027. And the thing is, in an ideal world where you knew that the Rockies would make more trades or make more difficult decisions, I would say that if Herman has a good 2025 and you can retain him on a more team-friendly contract, not overpay him like you had to do for some pitchers to get them to pitch here, then I would go, yeah, keep him 100%. It's nice. It'll be nice to have a good veteran in the rotation, and then we can mix up the things the rest of the way. But the problem is the Rockies probably aren't going to make those other tough decisions. Like, the Rockies aren't going to trade Kyle Freeland. He's their golden boy from Denver, Colorado.
And nobody would want him.
And Antonio Senzatella, who's barely pitched over the last 2 seasons and is on he's getting paid $10 million a year right now. I can't think of a lot of teams that would trade assets for that right now.
Nope. So you're just kind of stuck with them. And
so you're left with Marquez, who, yeah, he's a free agent at the end of the year, but so he either walks for nothing, you extend him and continue the logjam, or you trade him and get prospects back.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there's a pretty obvious option there.
You pay him money that handcuffs you from making other moves to help your roster. And that's a whole other conversation. But the Rockies, a lot of these deals have handcuffed them to where their payroll is tied up in a lot of bad performing contracts to where they can't spend, or they don't allow themselves to spend in other areas, like a rotation.
And even if you're not going to spend in the rotation, if you keep Herman and Kyle Freeland and Senzi are both set to be here next year, and Ryan Feltner is set to be here next year as he gets into his second year of arbitration, I think, next season.
Mm-hmm.
That gives you one spot in the rotation to open up. And you've got too many talented arms, because you are going to need to make room for Chase Dollander at some point, and Carson Palmquist, and Sean Sullivan, and Gabriel Hughes. You've got a whole brand new look rotation that is basically ready to go in 2026, if not at some point here in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't go into a year where you're supposed to have all of these guys and have the top 3/5 of your rotation be 3 guys all over the age of 30.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like
it's not viable for especially a team in the Rockies' position where you're
no.
trying to rebuild. But you've been
Of the 4 guys that are expected to be here, you've got to pick maybe 2 to keep tops.
yeah, and I feel like that's why in this season, I feel like Senzatella's kind of in that weird like block where he could be a guy that eventually maybe he gets relegated to the bullpen or something. I don't know if they eat that money and release him because that's still a good chunk of change for him that's left over. Because what? Let's see, Senzatella, yeah, 12 million. It's 24 million on his contract right now. Getting paid 12 million this year, 12 million next season, and then a $14 million club option. That's probably not getting exercised, uh, getting picked up. But did the Rockies eat that 24 million or no, somewhere in the ballpark like 15 or the 12 plus million? I don't know if they do. They don't tend to eat money like that very often.
They don't. And you know, for Senzi, he's had a good spring training so far. He's pitched 8 innings. He hasn't given up a run yet. That's great. Only 1 walk, but he's also not a big strikeout guy either. He's honestly struck out more people than expected so far this spring with 5 strikeouts over 8 innings. But Senzi is who Senzi is. He is a fastballer primarily, and the fastball is okay, but induce contact, induce ground balls, rely on the defense to get you out of trouble. And that has worked for him for most of his career, but he's a very one-dimensional pitcher.
Very predictable.
He's just never really developed outside of that vein.
Yeah. And then that's why, the Dodgers beat him around a little bit. I think so. It's like with any of these starters, these like 3 guys we're talking about, the same with Gomber. Maybe Freeland can stick around. He'd be the hardest one to move. But if Senzatello is performing very well or well enough, yeah, you'd probably have to kick in some cash, but he would be a trade candidate if you can move him to a needy team. Same with Marquez, who would probably be the premier one. If he's going to be on that 1-year contract, he's basically on a 1-year contract at $10 million. If he performs well, it's some good value. You could probably get something out of him. Freeland would be tough. You'd have to probably kick in quite a bit of cash. But if the phone rings, pick it up.
Yeah. Of the 5 guys set to be on the rotation to start 2025, if you had to pick 2 and get rid of the rest, who do you pick?
Well, Ryan Feltner's staying around. I'd probably end up keeping Freeland just because I like me a lefty. I need me a lefty. And I think he showed a lot of good stuff last season when he came back from that injury. And like he's that leader on that team.
I think
it's between him and Marquez, I think.
I think for me, it's tricky because where I fall right now is that we really need to see Ryan Feltner take another big step forward in 2025. He'll be going into his 2nd year of arbitration at the end of the season. And he had some great ups and some brutal lows in 2024. And there's a lot to like for Feltner, but we need to see more consistency from him, which we did see towards the back end of the season last year. I need to see him take another big step forward. And I like Ryan Feltner a lot, but for me, it's if he can't take another big step forward, then he is ultimately replaceable.
Well, yeah, it's like he's in that same camp. If he does well and average enough, and teams come calling saying, "Hey, we want Feltner." Like, oh, but he's got a 5 ERA. Like, oh yeah, we don't care about that. We know what he's doing. We think he'd help us. Seriously, look at that, because like you said, he could be replaceable. If it was like between oh, we could take money and give it to Marquez, keep him around, but we can't keep Feltner anymore. But we can get a decent prospect or two for him in a swap. I think you go ahead and entertain that conversation.
Yeah, it's tricky because his 2022 and 2023 seasons were both very similar. He pitched more in 22 than 23, but finished the year with about a 5.8 ERA. Last year, he made 30 starts, which is great, had a 4.49 ERA, which is fine. But his projections for this coming year all have him at an ERA of, over 4.5. 177 innings is the highest I'm seeing projected out of him, and around 140 to 150 strikeouts, which is all fine. But I think with the amount of team control that we have left for Feltner and an arbitration number that is potentially going to keep getting bigger, and if you haven't solidified that I think this guy is the future of this organization, and again, this is not to denigrate on Feltner because Ryan Feltner's awesome. I love Ryan Feltner, but it's the same. It's all of these guys, honestly. Every single person starting in this rotation, if someone comes a calling and says, I want this guy and I will give you this, and the return is decent, you've got to go for it, right?
Yes. If you're me, yes.
Yes.
Yes. What do you think, Principal Skinner?
Yes.
Oh, see. What do you think, fish guy from SpongeBob?
This is a load of barnacles.
Oh.
And it's tough because, it's never personal. Like, I find myself having to reiterate it a lot because you see a lot of the Rockies fandom is sometimes in a pretty tough place. People are unhappy and not unreasonably so, but you see a lot of more personal jabs at some of these guys. And it's like, on our end of things, it's not a personal thing. It's that baseball is a game where they teach you this in Little Big League, in the movie Little Big League. When you're in charge of a baseball team, you've got to make tough decisions. You can't just keep a guy around because you like him.
Yeah. Yeah, that pretty much is. And that's what the Rockies do, is their owner considers himself a fan, and you can't really afford to do that when you're running a big league team.
And I don't necessarily hate how loyal Dick Monfort is to his players. Like, he's got a heart in there, and he very clearly loves the players that are in this organization. But that's also a part of why he needs a guy who can make the tough decisions for him when he's not willing to. Someone needs to sit him down and go, Dick, listen, we know you love Ryan McMahon, but the Yankees are offering us, 2 of their top 10 prospects for him right now. You've got to pull the trigger on this.
Yeah, pretty much. So, like, they like to summarize with like the rotation projections, pretty much more of the same. That would take just the median performance of all these guys, of like 4 of these 4 guys. That's what you're getting in 2025, probably.
Yeah. If everybody stays healthy, I do not expect the Rockies to be the worst rotation in baseball again this year. I think a huge portion of why they have been so bad is just because everybody's been hurt.
But you can't always blame injuries, though.
Exactly.
Because every team, look at the Dodgers. They won the World Series
with some guys whose names I don't even remember. And that's the thing. I don't think the Rockies are going to be a spectacular blow them out of the water rotation. I mean, the Rockies will probably never have that just because of the nature of the game that they play. But I think there is a chance that this rotation at the end of the season looks very different than it did at the beginning of the year. And sometimes that's what you got to do.
It worked in my out-of-the-park baseball sim.
I mean, look at the Colorado Avalanche. I was looking, like, their opening day roster compared to their post-trade deadline roster is wildly different to like an insane degree, where it's like 12 to 13 players are completely different. And sometimes you got to do that. And you know what it involved? It involved making tough decisions.
Indeed, it did.
But they didn't have to send me. Carolina didn't have to do us dirty like that by sending Miko to the Stars, right?
Yeah.
Come on. That's just mean.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably going to do it here for us on Affected by Altitude. Thank you so much for listening. It's going to be a weird season. And I hope all of our starters, I do hope they all do well. And we'll see what happens. But Skyler, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you?
Find me over on Twitter at Skyler Timmons, and then over on Blue Sky at STimmons13, .bsquared.social. And find me over on Purple Row, right in the Wednesday Rock Piles. And also doing stuff for fansfirstsportsnetwork.com.
And you can find me on Blue Sky at EvanLang27. Remember that you can always find Rocky Mountain Rooftop on your favorite podcasting platforms of choice, be that Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and the rest. You can also find the video versions over on YouTube. And remember that you can find Rocky Mountain Rooftop on all social media platforms, including YouTube at Rocky Mountain Rooftop. That's at ROCKYMTN Rooftop. You can also find me writing the Monday Rock Piles and the weekly Pebble Reports. Man, I got a lot on my plate because we are also doing the State of the Position over on Purple Row. So I have like 4 different things I need to write this weekend. They're all going up on Monday and Tuesday. So keep an eye out for that. But once again, thank you so much for listening. I'm Evan. With me, as always, is my partner in crime, Skyler Timmons. And we'll see you next time on Affected by Altitude. Skyler, hit him with it.
Farewell.
Play a random clip from the soundboard.
Why, thank you, He-Man.
Perfect. That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Oh, man, that's a great dub. See you next time, everybody.
This has been Affected by Altitude, a Colorado Rockies podcast with Rocky Mountain Rooftop, a proud affiliate of the Fans First Sports Network. Catch new episodes every Monday on wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Be sure to follow us on YouTube as well for video versions of the show.